This is the 6th day of the September 93 7-day retreat in Springwater. Three questions that have come up stand out. Again, because they are shared. Usually it's never just one person asking a certain question. It comes up in human beings, here in this retreat, and in other places, and maybe at all times. One is the fear of dying, the fear of death, which started early in my life, hearing my mother talk a lot about death and dying. Is that fear of dying one of the sources for building up the self and the tremendous impulse to defend it at any cost? And another question: if it is true, and there have indeed been glimpses that this is so, that there is no separation, that the universe is one whole, undivided whole. Why is it that individual species and individual human beings and groups of human beings fight so desperately to survive as individuals or species or groups? Fight each other very often. And the last question: you've mentioned in your talks that oneself is everything, and this everything is nothing. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this nothing? We'll start with a middle question. Why, if in truth there is no separation, that life is one whole ongoing process or unfoldment, is there such a deeply ingrained instinct to survive as a species or as an individual or group with whom one is identified? If I heard the question right, the life of non-humans was included in this question, the fight for survival. The person mentioned a whole school of fish. And there are schools of fish, thousands of them, swimming together because that ensures survival of individuals. Is it impossible? This question is coming up right now. Is it impossible to include in this ongoing unitary process of life unfoldment the urge for survival, the instinct for survival? Because this is what seems to be programmed, imprinted into every single cell. The simple organism, the one-celled organism, or the ever-complex organisms consisting of millions, billions of specialized cells, like human beings, and what we call the higher animals. We could wonder why it is so, and ask questions, and speculate, and think, and theorize, but it is a fact, isn't it? That there's tremendous instinct and urge to survive. And an amazing cleverness evolving in living beings to ensure survival, to adapt to changing circumstances. And yet, the fact is, this I have read, that there are far more extinct species than there are living species. So extinction of a species is nothing new under the sun. Suns themselves explode. If for a moment we look at the animals, again in a simple way, I couldn't do it complexly if I wanted to. Don't know that much about it. But to ensure the territory, to provide the food for raising the young, to ensure the females, keep the intruders out who would mate with them. To protect the young by building nests or dens and fighting off dangerous intruders that may harm the young. Goes on to an amazing and ingenious degree in animals, and in a very simple way, animals very quickly get the message. What is the territory, where to intrude, where not. There may be battles fought by males, or maybe females in some cases. But it rarely, sometimes it does, but rarely does it end in bloody battles or death. The defeated male just trots off, sometimes the way the movies show it. The nature movies looks a little bit defeated, humiliated, but that may be a projection already. He may not be thinking at all, he just moves away from danger or from impossibility of existence. While human beings planted a flag on the moon upon arrival, no animal plants flags on its territory. Just disperses some scents to keep the intruders off. So it is very likely the evolution of a large brain, very much larger than that in most animals, that makes possible complications in our need for survival. And we can go into that in a moment. The human beings are not the only organisms with an extraordinarily large brain. To my knowledge, the higher apes have a very high brain capacity, and so do the whales and dolphins. But whales and dolphins, who may even have a larger brain than human beings, have no hands with which to build weapons or tools or artifacts. They just have fins to swim or jump out of the water and back in, and to sing songs to each other. Have a maybe very complex language, more syllables or sounds than have been counted in the human language. So is that what the brain capacity is used for, to care well for the young and to sing songs to each other over thousands of miles? And enjoy swimming and jumping and frolicking while going along? Or is this already a projection that there is a real enjoyment in this way of swimming, surfacing, turning, and plunging back in? So, we human beings are stuck with this brain, which has the capacity to record everything that's ever happened in our life, what's ever been experienced or thought or reacted to or conceived or thought or imagined or fantasized. All of this, there's enough space to record all of that as we go along, and yet we're told we're only using a small fraction of this immense brain with its billions and trillions of neurons and their possibility to interconnect throughout the body with the organs and the glands and the muscles. All the recorded and remembered and associated material being able at almost an instant, with very little time lapse, to mobilize the energies of the body in fear, anger, joy, anxiety, rage, about something that happened in the past. Remembering and mobilizing now as though what happened in the past was indeed threatening or taking place this moment. In imagination, in the movies, if you will. Something is going on in this brain that no one knows much about yet. Someone has likened it to holographs. If we remember right now our home, or our children if we have any, our most favorite vacation place, there it is, isn't it? Not as clear as a photograph or a video, but there's something projected within the brain to be seen and heard and felt and smelled. Brain researchers have electronically or electrically stimulated certain parts of the human brain with willing subjects. And maybe a whole scene of being in grandma's house with the smell of cookies in the oven. I'm inventing this scene, but something like that. It was very vivid and very comprehensive of all the senses operating, evoked by stimulation of a certain point in the brain. So, programmed as all other living organisms for whatever reason, there it is. It's inexplicable, unexplainable. The need to survive, the urge, the instinct, the drive and energy to bring that about, survival of this organism by whatever means. And getting together in groups has proven to be a very helpful means to survive together, sharing work, sharing tasks, rearing the young, providing the food, protecting against intruders, animals or humans. This survival has functioned for primitive people. We call them primitive, simple, whatever word. For a long time, I read recently that some of these Neolithic people lived for between 20 and 30,000 years. And to be able to bring that off needed a lot of simplicity of living, uncomplicated thought, and of course a lot of space. Not to bump into each other and wanting the other's space or possessions or women. But today we don't have this space, and we don't have simple thinking anymore. Our thoughts are incredibly complicated and cumulative. And one of the outstanding productions of thinking is that there is the separate me, the separate self. Inside this body, owning this body as it were, maybe even controlling it. This separate self made up of thinking and imaging and remembering and the collective mystique about it. Either the separate self or the group self, the tribal self or soul. This thought has invented and is constantly reinventing and embellishing in each one of us. It is happening. And the amazing thing is that this happening can be observed, if you will. There can be awareness of this. Again, by this amazing process of being transparent within to the thoughts and images and fantasies and stories that go on and elicit such emotional response from this body. I don't think there's anyone who has spent silent time, at times motionlessly listening, wondering, openly looking, who hasn't become aware of this story going on about my life. It's not just an image. It's not just clusters of images, many of them contradictory. But there's a whole succession of imagery and storyline about my life, to which there is a tremendous attachment whether that story is more tragedy than comedy or drama. There's attachment to it. And why? When asked this question, but we are attached to reading stories, aren't we? Our little children, and nothing more you can do for them than take them on your lap and cuddle together and read a story together. I read somewhere recently that God created man because he loves stories. And I wasn't sure who the he refers to. Because it's God and man. That's probably an old-fashioned story today. It would be put more correctly. So we can ask ad infinitum, why are we attached to the story of our lives? But it happens, doesn't it? It's a fact. You could just as soon ask, why are we attached to reading novels? Why do we love to go to the movies? Some people once, twice, 3 times a week. Sometimes every day or every night. Sometimes 2 movies per night. It's not said judgmentally, even though you may project that on me. I'm not judging it. I'm just amazed at that capacity. Because we love it. We love to identify with personalities, with heroes, good and bad, the villain and the villainess, and the hero and the heroine. I remember one of the first movies I saw. I didn't get to see many movies. It was not considered right for children in Germany to go to the movies. They were carefully selected, and then maybe one a year. If I just imagine right now the amount of movies that my grandchildren have seen, some of which I couldn't see, like Batman, I don't mean the series, but this movie. They invited me once to see it with them. I was stunned at their capacity to see violence and horror and not feel horrified or scared. And yet they're nice children, very loving, very sweet. And while they visited here this summer for 10 days, they never ever once were interested in turning on the TV. Never asked for video. There was enough going on here. So, we can ask, why do we love stories and novels and drama and plays and movies and videos? But we do. The absorption it allows, maybe away from our nitty-gritty or boring or too exciting daily life, too upsetting daily life, carried away into storyland, wonderland, or horrorland. Oh, I was beginning to say earlier, I remember the few movies I saw, if there was any kind of a sad ending. One of them was called The Red Shoes, about a dancer. I cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. Because then I was older, didn't matter. Anna Karenina finally throwing herself in front of the train. My God. Total identification, I guess, and total sadness and pain at this happening to her or to oneself. Where is the dividing line? So it's no wonder that there is great attachment and care given, attachment to and care given to the story of my life, of our life. And not just attachment to it, but incredible power emanating from this story of my life, affecting the senses, the emotions, the thinking. Emotions affect the thinking. We've been talking all week long about thinking affecting the emotions, but when there's strong emotion, strong anger, how can we think clearly? We can't. We're strongly afraid, anxious, enraged, jealous. Can we think clearly? Of course not. So these emotions which are woven as an inseparable fabric, the story of our lives, have powerful impact on the way we react, respond to each other. And if a reaction has happened, I've gotten hurt, like entering it into a journal, it gets entered into the continuous series of my life story. He hurt me again. She said this again. I was victimized again. I failed again. Oh, I keep being successful. I'm making progress. I can't cover it all, obviously. Everybody can read their own life story and the entries, and maybe catch the moment of an entry, the moment of recording, what happened, into language and imagery and emotional expression, and observe to one's astonishment that the story is the thing that keeps having the impact on the mood, the reactions, not what happened. What happened is finished, it's gone, it's no longer there. The encounter is over. But the story keeps going. And the story may not be accurately reporting what happened. It's already embellished or interpreted in terms of previous chapters, or ideas or wishes, or fears. So let's watch that. That is one of the most interesting and easy, relatively easy things to observe. How an event becomes a story in memory, and that memory can be present right now very vividly. Doesn't seem memory at all. And how the reaction is to the memory, and how it's been recorded, and how it's being put and expressed. Things added to it. Always oneself as either the victor or the victim, the hero or heroine. The sufferer is a good part of many people's story, being the sufferer, the victim. And clinging to the contents of that story rather than letting go the actual event. Is that possible for us? To live from moment to moment, event to event, encounter to encounter. Be aware that recording is such a strong habit. And reacting to the recording continues the mood. Can that be watched so intelligently, so non-judgmentally, openly, interestedly, that maybe this story begins to lose its power over this life. It's seen for what it is. And maybe here and there, an encounter, a hurt, or a flattery. And seeing no need to record it. Just being there with it, feeling it, seeing it, hearing it. The reaction may or may not take place. If it has taken place, so it has. Needs no judgment. Speaks for itself. We talked about that yesterday. Our actions and reactions speak for themselves. They have no need for further judgment. And then let go of, so that the next day is fresh, like the sun coming through the windows, making all the pearls of water glisten on the grasses and flowers. Coming back to why in this universe of wholeness, if this is indeed true, this tremendous urge to survive as an individual, has our instinctual, animal urge to survive, which we said in the beginning is probably programmed in the very first cell, has that transferred onto this creation of the imaged self, the imagined story self, so that now all the powers and ingenuity of this organism and brain to keep it going is also included or transferred to this me, this story me. And that's why the tremendous intensity in defending it, as though it was the body itself which was being threatened when somebody criticizes us, accuses us unjustly. We've gone through this in groups. And the almost instantaneous defense springing up, protection and aggression, retaliation. Everything that has evolved throughout living organism history over millions and millions and millions of years is now applied to this creation of the human brain, which is me, I, self, mine, yours, ours. To keep it going. And we fear for this creation, we cry for it, we are jealous for it, or love it, like we love the hero in the movies or in the novel, which we don't want to end. If it's a good novel, we don't want it to end. We don't want it to end. This is the other question. Is the fear of dying the reason for defending myself so arduously, building up all this structure and then defending it at all costs? Does that have to do with the fear of dying? Death. What is thought doing right now? Thinking about death, thinking about dying. Can thought know what dying is, know what death is? Or can it only think about death and think about dying, using whatever is available to it from stored memory, remembrances of being with someone who died, seeing people die, reading about dying, reading religious books about dying, psychological ones. This thought can do. Carry together the information and spin. Is thought wondering what this is all about? A fire? Or an air raid? Thought can do that. A stimulus and then interpreting it, thinking about it. Or can one just listen to this? Last time this happened, it went on for almost 10 minutes. After we've had 3 false alarms here, this is probably not a false alarm. That's nice. So we were saying that thought can think. That's what thought is. Thought is thinking about dying, about death. And whichever way the thoughts run, the imagery goes, the imagination pictures it. It can induce great fear. A child hearing a mother talk so much about death and dying can work up a lot of fear about this unthinkable thing, because whatever thought presents isn't the real thing, but it can present very horrifying scenarios. Someone once said, when we think about ourselves as dead, when this is being thought, it is like thinking being buried alive, because we're alive right now as we're thinking about being dead. It's impossible. And yet, to imagine oneself being buried alive brings great terror. And to imagine the story of one's life already as a child has a lot of fantasy about me as heroine or hero, or villain, victim. A lot of fantasy about what one will be or could have or become. That to come to an end makes no sense to thought. Just as the ending of the novel or the ending of the beautiful movie leaves one wanting more. And one will go to Batman 2 and Batman 3. So in our fear of dying, fear of death, which is unimaginable, or else what is imagined is unacceptable, scary, upsetting. Human beings, the human brain has invented comforting after-death scenarios. There probably is not a religion, also invented by thought, that has no way of dealing imaginatively with life after death, which makes it more comforting to deal with this thought which is ever present. Maybe not ever present if it is ever repressed, but death is with us. Relatives die, and of course these days in the newspapers, magazines, movies, TV, we're surrounded by death and dying. So, religious imagination has invented after-death scenarios, paradises, happy hunting grounds. When we learned about in Germany, of course, we had to particularly learn about the ancient Germans. Warriors, fighters, loving to clash and fight, axe each other, and and drink gallons of beer, or whatever that drink was called, it escapes me right now. And the afterlife scenario was an eternal battlefield to battle each other, and then the Valkyries, these beautiful buxom women, coming and picking up the dead warrior, taking him on her horse, and taking them back into Valhalla, where there is beer to revive the spirit. I hope there is no scholar in Germanistics here. I may not have reported this completely So, I think the question can be answered in the affirmative. Yes, fear of dying is connected with building up structures and defending them. Because any structure that's built in defense of fear needs defense to be maintained, lest the fear emerge again. This is the vicious cycle of defense, that it needs more defense to keep it intact. Defenses around defenses around defenses around what? Me? The idea of me? And what is that? A lot of us have started what we call our spiritual journey or inquiry, walking a religious path. I'm not using these words these days, but this is very common expression. We have started our spiritual journey or religious path in search of finding out what we really are, why we are born, why we must die, what there is beyond living and dying, whether there is something, whether there is a God, divinity, something beyond this, at times so hard, burdensome, almost unbearable, nitty-gritty daily life. Conflict-ridden. And we search, which usually means the brain searches for information, for solace, for peace, for comfort, for harmony. And then someone says, the brain can't figure it out. It's impossible. The brain can only create scenarios which have nothing to do with reality, except the reality of a holograph or something like that inside the skull. So what is the meaning of life? What am I? What is God? What is dying? And one is wondering whether questions like this can be put and asked whether questions like this can be put and asked in a new way, not traveling immediately into the cortex, into the brain, to figure out answers, which is what thinking does and it is supposed to do, and that's what its function is, to figure things out. But whether a question like, what am I? Or what is the meaning of my life? Is there a God? What is dying? Why am I born? Why do I have to die? Asking questions like this, whichever way it comes to one, without answering them. Having gone through all lamentation and cerebration and having found no contentment in cerebral answers, in reading, hearing lectures. So can a new questioning begin with a question, but not knowing the answer? And really understanding something through glimpses of the futility of thinking about it some more. It'll happen inevitably the moment there's no attention. Then our mechanical processes take over again. And the foremost of them is to think our problems into a solution, or to think that this is what we're doing. But when there's some wondering, I want to get away from the word attention, because some people have told me they're becoming obsessed with the idea that they have to do attention. They have to be attentive. Anything can become an obsessive idea, including attention and awareness, or seeing or listening. So, how can we put it into words without letting the words become an obsessive injunction? Do this, don't do that. So, here's the question: what am I? And really not knowing. We talked earlier about the darkness of not knowing. But wondering, looking within as it were, but not to take that too literally, listening openly, the body opening up. The body can open up. It's amazing. Not just the capacities of the brain are unused, the large amount of brain cells totally unused, but the capacity of this body is not fully used. The way we live so mechanically, so routinely, so reactively, so much based on storyline. So, what am I? Whatever your question may be, it doesn't matter. What is it? And not know, and therefore, and yet curious, interested. With that comes some energy. And some opening up of the senses, the body. And if indeed, as it does happen at times, the thinking quiets down, because it is seen to be useless in this inquiry of what am I or what is this? This being or this pain or what is everything? Then it's indeed possible for thought to slow down. It has no function there. It's not being condemned or banned or cut. It just slows down in this inquiry of what am I, without knowing, and not seeking verbal answers or intellectual solutions. It's just quieting, wondering. The whole of oneself is the question, without knowing. And if this indeed is taking place, then this constant self-reflective mechanism we've talked so much about, which we experience as cumbersome self-consciousness at times. How am I doing? How are they seeing me? And so forth. That also slows down. And when that slows down, there is no feeling of self-consciousness. When it's simple, see, it's simple. When I'm not thinking about myself, or rather, when there's no thinking about myself, there's no self. Because self only exists in thinking about it. So then what is there in this moment of open wondering and listening and not knowing? Everything is there, the way it is. The sensations, the warmth, the wetness of perspiration, the cawing of the crows, people sitting, breathing. Not the idea of breathing or counting it, but just that. It's there. The trees and hills, the window frames, the gray sky, the quietness and sound of what? So this last question, which we mentioned in the beginning, what do you mean I'm everything and everything is nothing? What is this nothing? Nothing is the mind open, not resisting, not grasping, not refusing or rejecting. Just open, spacious, not knowing. And no feeling of separation from all there is. Without making a thing out of it. We will end here for today.